or at least it's examining the link between war veterans, PTSD, and suicide. Shannon, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Big topic, big documentary that's out there, and what are we learning out of this thing?
Well, it's just bringing more education about PTSD. It talks about the suicide rate of 22 veterans a day. It also talks about how PTSD impacts the families, because it's not just the veteran that is struggling. That affects everybody that loves them, knows them, but, the internal core of the family.
We see oftentimes, whether it's in your own city or if you travel to larger cities, you see people who are homeless. And, they're the undesirables. And I really would wonder, what is the percentage of those people who are, what is the percentage that are veterans?
You know what? I don't know. I don't have that number, but I do know that it's really significant.
Yeah.
Even here locally across the United States, there's a lot of organizations that help, boots on the ground for veterans that have no homes.
And I hate to say what we do is we're there for those that are that come back normal. But the minute there becomes a burden and it becomes uncomfortable, we like to look the other way. And those are the real problems that I think have to be dealt with. And that's what this documentary comes out and shows. What can we do? How do we help?
Well, I know there's a lot of different ways to help, but one of the ways that we help is we provide highly trained service dogs to our veterans at no charge to them. Each one of our dogs goes through about 350 hours of training, which takes about 7 months, and the veterans go through the last 2 months of that training with us, and we gift these dogs to them 100%. And the significant change in their lives we've seen throughout the 4 years that we've provided 32 service dogs to veterans in the last 4 years free of charge. And many of them have jobs now where they didn't have jobs, and their service dogs go to work with them. But watching them reintegrate back into society and overcome those invisible wounds of war that have kept them so isolated is just a significant daily process of healing, and it's just really an amazing thing to watch.
Shannon, is there any validity to, I went through basic training, and even then I was older when I went through basic training than were most of my peers at the time. I was even older than some of my TIs, but I think I was older than all of my TIs, actually. But it always struck me as strange that there was so much emphasis on physical training and in learning, rules and regulations, but there was really no psychological training. Not that you can really be psychologically prepared for what you're about to go into, but there was nothing. There was no preparation for that. Is that a valid thing to maybe start proposing, that there is, even in basic training, some psychological training that goes on?
I wouldn't, just my opinion, I don't know. Both my boys are in the Army and Marines, and I don't know how you prepare somebody for something that's going to I don't know how you would prepare somebody for something like that, because it's just depending on where they're going to end up going and what they're going to be exposed to. When they are in the combat, we work with combat veterans in Northwest Battle Buddies, and they are in such a state of readiness all the time, and they're always on alert when they're in a combat situation, and it's functioning like that over a period of time that brings about things like PTSD and that trauma, because they're having to function on that high alert all the time in a place that's not safe. And how do you prepare for that? How do you screen somebody for that?
Well, not even screening, but maybe saying, this might happen to you. These are the signs. If you start to feel this way, it's normal. We're not going to stigmatize it, and you need to seek help. Not that you can prepare somebody for what they're going to see in the battlefield.
We're talking to Shannon Walker, and she's an expert on PTSD. And the documentary that is out is The War Comes Home, Suicide Soldiers and PTSD. You have a question?
I do. I just, on the number 22 per day, it is a shocking...
That's a terrible number.
There was an article in the LA Times, and others have questioned this number as well. I believe the LA Times article said if you actually break down the numbers, it's one a day, and that's certainly one too many. Can you offer any clarity on this number, where these numbers come from, and is it actually as high as that's the number always quoted as 22?
Yeah.
What do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, the only thing I actually had this discussion yesterday with one of the Vietnam veterans that has one of our dogs, and we were talking about that discrepancy right there, and he said exactly the same thing that you just said. Even one a day is too many. Yeah. So wherever the numbers are coming from, I think it is still too many, and so therefore we got to do whatever we can do, no matter what the number.
Yeah, and we're probably doing a much better job today than we did after Vietnam, even though there are still many problems. Imagine what those guys had to go through. I mean, so many came home with no families left, and
no support,
nowhere to go, no job, and the country hated them at that time. It was just terrible. Now we seem to look at it differently, but it's still a terrible story. It's still a terrible example of how we appreciate these people that stood up for the country.
Absolutely. I will tell you, the Vietnam veterans that we serve in our organization are some of my favorites because they are getting that welcome home in such a significant way by a gift of a highly trained service dog like we do.
Okay, talk about the service dog and how that helps.
Well, it helps in a lot of ways. Not only do the dogs serve them where they might have in combat, where they might have developed a vulnerability in their physical body.
Yeah.
The dogs can act as a barrier, but they also snap them out of when they're having a panic attack. They wake them up from nightmares because so often night terrors is such a significant part of their life. But even when they're awake and they are outside, integrating in a situation into public and they start to have a panic attack, the dogs actually can help bring them out of that by licking their hands, getting in their lap, licking their face, bringing them back to the moment of now. Not to mention the 2 months of training that our handlers go through to get their dogs.
Yeah.
It's the last part of the process. But they also learn how to talk to the public. They learn how to answer questions and start to reintegrate in that way in a very productive, confident way, which gives them so much freedom and independence moving forward with that service dog.
Yeah. Andrew, quick question, and then...
what has the military done to prepare families for the arrival back for these soldiers? I knew one woman whose husband was away for a while. They sent a packet, what to expect when your soldier comes home.
Yeah.
What steps are they actually taking to kind of get the family ready for the possibility of this?
You know what? I can't answer that. I do know that there are some organizations out there, just like, Yellow Ribbon event and things like that, where they do offer support to families and therapies and where they can get educated in counseling to help understand. But that's the only thing that I've personally been aware of.
All right. Shannon, how do we, how can people see this? I don't think it's playing in our theaters. Can you get it online? Are you able to get it on Netflix? And
I believe it's available on DVD and Blu-ray now.
Okay, all right.
And so they can do that, yes.
All right, The War Comes Home, Suicide Veterans and PTSD. Shannon, great stuff that you do, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I have to tell you, one of the things that to keep in mind with what goes on there's been a huge change since Vietnam on how our country fights wars. And if you remember, and you don't see this, you don't see people out protesting, why should our guys and women have to be going off to war? The reason is because we've used the National Guard. And there's no longer a draft where we're drafting people, but there's been this really quiet, secretive, I think devious way of getting these families to give up their young ones. And you do it through the National Guard, and you do it with multiple tours of duty. It's really a problem that I think is going to come to a head. It's going to happen because how many tours can these people do, right? Mm-hmm. That's what we learned. That's what we learned out of Vietnam: how to deceive the country into getting their people to stand up for these conflicts. It's pretty tough when these guys come home, and these women come home as well. Got a break. Hold tight. Coming back at WIBX.